Billionaire finds young boy at his son's grave. What happens next is unbelievable. Why would a grieving billionaire find a young boy visiting his deceased son's grave and calling him dad? The discovery is stunning, but the truly unbelievable twist comes when protecting this secret grandson unearths evidence that his son's tragic accident 5 years ago was actually cold-blooded murder. Subscribe, like, and listen now to hear the full, incredible story. The wrought iron gates sighed shut behind Jonathan Hart, the sound swallowed by the thick Boston fog draping Mount Auburn Cemetery. Rain slicked the granite pathways, mirroring the perpetual dampness in his own soul. 5 years. 5 years since Daniel, his bright, artistic son, had been stolen by a tangle of wet road and twisted metal. Jonathan stood before the simple headstone Daniel Hart, beloved son, the engraved words a constant, dull ache beneath his ribs. He performed his ritual, clearing away fallen leaves, adjusting the small wreath he brought weekly, whispering updates about the soulless churn of Hart Enterprises, words Daniel would have politely endured in life. As he straightened, preparing to retreat back to his empty mansion, an echoing silence, a sound snagged his attention. A soft rustle, then a sniffle, unnaturally loud in the graveyard's hush. He turned. Through the swirling mist, a small figure materialized beside Daniel's grave. A boy, perhaps 9 or 10, wearing a thin jacket inadequate for the damp chill. He knelt, placing a single, slightly wilted white daisy against the cold stone. Then the boy spoke, his voice a soft murmur lost almost instantly to the fog, yet Jonathan heard it clear as a bell. "I miss you, Dad." Jonathan froze, his carefully constructed composure shattering. "Dad?" His heart seized, a frantic bird trapped in his chest. He took a step closer, drawn by an invisible, terrifying force. The boy looked up, startled, his eyes wide and wary. And in those eyes, deep brown and fringed with dark lashes, beneath a tumble of rain-dampened curly hair, Jonathan saw him. He saw Daniel. The shape of the face, the set of the jaw, the uncanny resemblance, it was like staring at a ghost, a miniature echo of his lost son. Who was this child? Why was he here, at Daniel's grave, uttering that impossible word? Hope, terrifying and unwelcome, warred with utter confusion. Jonathan took another step, his own voice, when he finally found it, emerging as a rough whisper, trembling like the damp leaves underfoot. Who are you?" Jonathan Hart, at 60, commanded a vast empire built of concrete, steel, and shrewd negotiation. Hart Enterprises dominated Boston's real estate landscape, its portfolio ranging from gleaming skyscrapers downtown to sprawling suburban developments. Jonathan was a titan of industry, respected, feared, immensely wealthy, yet utterly impoverished in spirit since Daniel's death. His life had become a hollow shell. The sprawling Beacon Hill mansion felt cavernous, staffed by people who moved like ghosts around his solitary routines. His marriage had dissolved years before Daniel's accident, leaving only polite distance and separate charity boards. His work, once a source of pride and intellectual stimulation, now felt like a relentless machine demanding fuel he no longer possessed. His only real connection to the past, to joy, was his weekly pilgrimage to Daniel's grave. Daniel had been the counterpoint to Jonathan's driven pragmatism. An artist with a gentle soul and a quiet intensity, he'd pursued painting and sculpture, navigating his father's corporate world with a mixture of detached amusement and filial duty. Their relationship had been complex, underscored by unspoken expectations and differing worldviews, but rooted in a deep, if sometimes awkward, love. Daniel had shown little interest in taking over Hart Enterprises, a fact that had been a source of quiet friction, yet Jonathan had secretly admired his son's commitment to his passion. The accident, a sudden loss on a treacherous road during a weekend trip, had been ruled just that, a tragic accident. The police report cited speed and wet conditions. Jonathan, numb with grief, had accepted it, retreating into a world walled off by sorrow and work. Within Hart Enterprises, a subtle power dynamic had shifted since Daniel's passing. Victor Langston, Jonathan's longtime chief operating officer and former business partner, had stepped seamlessly into the vacuum left by the presumed lack of an heir. Smooth, intelligent, and relentlessly ambitious, Victor managed the day-to-day operations with chilling efficiency, his loyalty to Jonathan seemingly absolute. Yet, beneath the surface, Victor subtly consolidated power, steering the company towards his own vision, often leveraging Jonathan's grief-induced attachment. There were whispers in the corporate corridors about Victor's quiet maneuvering, but Jonathan, consumed by his loss, paid them little heed. Boston, Jonathan City, mirrored his own state, a place of deep history and old money, contrasted with gleaming new developments and cutting-edge industries. It was a city of quiet traditions and fierce ambitions, where legacy mattered, often intensely so. For Jonathan, the Hart legacy now felt like a burden, a kingdom without an heir, destined perhaps to fall under Victor Langston's capable, yet somehow unsettling stewardship. He existed in a state of suspended animation, managing his empire by rote, his heart perpetually frozen on that rainy April afternoon 5 years prior, until a small boy with Daniel's eyes appeared like an apparition in the fog. The graveyard encounter unfolded in a suspended reality. Jonathan knelt, mirroring the boy's posture, trying to quell the frantic pounding in his chest. "Who are you?" he repeated, his voice softer now, less demanding. The boy, startled by Jonathan's sudden appearance, but seemingly sensing no immediate threat, clutched his single remaining daisy. "I'm Sam," he said, his voice small but clear. He looked from Jonathan to the headstone and back again. "Mommy says this is where my dad is. Daniel Hart." The confirmation, spoken so simply, struck Jonathan with the force of a physical blow. He fought for breath, the foggy air feeling thick and unyielding. Daniel's son? It seemed impossible. Daniel had never mentioned a child, never spoken of a serious relationship that might have led to this. Yet, the boy's resemblance was uncanny, irrefutable, and his presence here, alone, speaking to the grave, it felt undeniably real. Your mommy told you to come here?" Jonathan asked, gently probing, his mind racing to reconcile this revelation with the past 5 years of silence. Sam nodded. "She said Dad liked daisies, so I bring them when I can. She said he was a good artist. She doesn't talk about him much." He looked down at the flower in his hand. "I come sometimes after school, especially when Mommy works late. I like to tell him stuff." The innocence, the matter-of-fact acceptance of his solitary visits, pierced Jonathan's grief-numbed heart. This child, Daniel's child, had been visiting his father's grave, alone, for who knew how long. "And your mommy, where is she now?" Jonathan asked, concern mixing with the desperate need for verification. "She's at work. She teaches kindergarten," Sam replied, seemingly deciding Jonathan was safe enough to trust. "She doesn't know I walk here alone. It's kind of far." A wave of protectiveness washed over Jonathan, eclipsing even his shock. He couldn't leave this boy, his grandson, wandering alone in a cemetery. "Sam," he said, his voice thick with emotion, I am Daniel's father. That makes me your grandfather." Sam's eyes widened, a flicker of understanding dawning. "Grandpa," he whispered, the word tentative, hopeful. Jonathan nodded, unable to speak for a moment. He needed to meet Sam's mother. He needed the full story. "Sam," he said finally, "would it be all right could you perhaps show me where you live? I'd very much like to meet your mommy." Sam hesitated, a flicker of ingrained stranger danger caution crossing his face. But Jonathan's palpable emotion, the shared connection through Daniel, seemed to sway him. He gave a small, uncertain nod. Jonathan's initial reaction was a chaotic blend of disbelief, grief renewed, and a fragile, terrifying hope. Could this be real? A piece of Daniel, living, breathing, right here? If so, why this secrecy? His mind, trained in business strategy, immediately began calculating possibilities, risks, implications. But overriding the analysis was the raw, visceral pull towards this boy with his son's eyes. Initial goal: meet Sam's mother, confirm the story beyond doubt, and understand why Daniel's child had been kept secret for nearly a decade. First steps: gaining Sam's fragile trust, ensuring his immediate safety, and accompanying him home to face the woman who held the key to this unbelievable revelation. The fog in the cemetery felt symbolic of the uncertainty ahead, but for the first time in 5 years, a tiny, unexpected pinprick of light pierced Jonathan Hart's perpetual gray. The walk from his cemetery to Sam's home was quiet, charged with unspoken questions. Sam led Jonathan through modest residential streets on the outskirts of Boston, a world away from Jonathan's Beacon Hill enclave. They arrived at a small, well-kept apartment building. On the second floor, Sam unlocked the door to reveal a tiny, tidy apartment filled with children's books and artwork. A woman looked up from the small kitchen table, startled Clara Carter. Clara, in her early 30s, possessed a quiet warmth, but her eyes immediately became wary, guarded, as she saw Jonathan standing behind her son. Sam rushed to her side. "Mommy, this is Grandpa," he announced, simultaneously proud and nervous. The next hour unfolded in a haze of careful explanations and raw emotion. Clara, initially defensive and fearful, slowly recounted her story. She had met Daniel 6 years ago at a gallery opening. They fell deeply, quietly in love. She, a kindergarten teacher from a working-class background. He, the scion of a powerful family, burdened by expectation. When she discovered she was pregnant, Daniel was overjoyed but also terrified, not of fatherhood itself, but of his family's reaction, particularly his father's perceived disapproval of their relationship and Daniel's non-corporate life path. He'd convinced Clara to keep the pregnancy and later Sam, a secret for a little while, promising to stand up to his family once he felt more established, wanting to shield her and Sam from the pressure and potential rejection until then. His sudden death shattered those plans. Clara, heartbroken and alone, learned of the accident through the news. Unsure how to navigate the imposing Hart family apparatus, grieving Daniel and protecting her infant son, she chose to honor his wish for privacy, raising Sam on her own, telling him about his father gradually, bringing him to the only place she knew Daniel rested. Jonathan listened, his initial skepticism melting away in the face of Clara's quiet dignity, her evident love for Sam, and the details that rang true about Daniel's sensitive nature and his complex relationship with his family legacy. The resemblance between Sam and Daniel was undeniable. He saw not a gold digger, but a devoted mother caught in tragic circumstances. Overwhelmed, Jonathan made an immediate, heartfelt offer of support, financial assistance, resources for Sam's education, anything they needed. Clara, though grateful, was hesitant, emphasizing she wanted nothing for herself, only security for Sam. Jonathan, respecting her caution but needing legal certainty, gently suggested a paternity test. Clara, understanding the necessity, agreed. This practical step, paradoxically, solidified a fragile trust between them. The complication arose swiftly and silently. News travels fast in wealthy circles, especially news involving potential heirs. Word of Jonathan Hart, suddenly acknowledging a previously unknown grandson, reached Victor Langston. Though Jonathan had tried to keep the paternity test discreet, using a private lab, information inevitably leaked, perhaps through hospital staff, legal channels processing initial paperwork, or even a casual remark Jonathan made to a board member in a moment of uncharacteristic openness. For Victor, whose long-term strategy revolved around controlling Hart Enterprises after Jonathan, the existence of a direct Hart heir was catastrophic. He immediately tasked his own private investigators, men far less scrupulous than Jonathan's security team, to dig into Clara Carter and Sam. He needed leverage, ammunition, anything to discredit them or remove them from the picture before Jonathan could formally alter succession plans. Victor began making subtle inquiries within the company about Jonathan's recent emotional state, planting seeds of doubt about his judgment. Simultaneously, Clara started noticing an unfamiliar car parked down the street from her apartment building late at night, making her uneasy. The quiet life she had carefully built for Sam was beginning to feel frighteningly exposed. The paternity test results came back, confirming with scientific certainty what Jonathan already knew in his heart. Sam was Daniel's son. Holding the official document felt surreal, a blend of profound joy and crushing sorrow. Joy at this unexpected, living link to Daniel. Sorrow for the years lost, for Daniel never knowing his own child, for the secrets and fears that had kept them apart. Jonathan embraced his new role with quiet intensity. He established a substantial trust fund for Sam's future, ensuring his financial security regardless of what happened with Hart Enterprises. He began spending regular time with Sam and Clara, tentative visits initially, then park outings, museum trips, dinners at quiet restaurants. He saw Daniel's artistic talent emerging in Sam's detailed drawings, his quiet thoughtfulness in Sam's insightful questions. He found himself genuinely liking Clara, respecting her resilience and her devotion to Sam. A fragile family unit began to form, thawing the ice around Jonathan's heart. He started making plans to formally acknowledge Sam within the Hart family structure and amend his will accordingly. It was during this period of cautious hope that Jonathan's own investigators delivered their first truly alarming report. They had been digging into the circumstances surrounding Daniel's accident 5 years prior, cross-referencing police reports, insurance claims, and Daniel's known movements. They found inconsistencies. The initial police report mentioned potential brake failure, but a follow-up mechanical inspection, commissioned by the insurance company, found no definitive fault, attributing the crash solely to speed and weather. However, Jonathan's team located the tow truck driver who first arrived on the scene. He recalled seeing unusual markings near the brake lines, like tool scratches, but hadn't thought much of it at the time. More significantly, the investigators uncovered financial records showing large, untraceable payments made by a shell corporation indirectly linked to Victor Langston to a specific auto repair shop Daniel sometimes used, just days before the accident. The owner of that shop had abruptly closed business and left the state shortly after Daniel's death. This was the turning point. The vague unease Jonathan felt about the accident crystallized into horrific suspicion. Brake failure hadn't just been a possibility, it might have been induced. And the money trail, however indirect, pointed towards Victor Langston, the man who stood to gain the most from Daniel's death, the man now threatened by Sam's existence. Jonathan felt a cold fury unlike anything he'd known. His grief, previously a passive weight, ignited into a burning need for truth and justice. He realized Victor wasn't just a corporate rival maneuvering for control. He was potentially a murderer who had killed his son and covered it up for 5 years. And now, that same man posed a direct threat to Daniel's other legacy, Sam. His focus shifted irrevocably. Protecting Sam and Clara wasn't just about providing support. It was about neutralizing a deadly threat. Point of no return. Jonathan instructed his lead investigator, a former FBI agent named Marcus Thorne, to dedicate all necessary resources to definitively proving Victor Langston's involvement in Daniel's death, using any legal means necessary. He also significantly upgraded Clara and Sam's security, no longer discreetly, but overtly, sending a clear message to Victor that they were protected. The grieving father was replaced by the calculating, ruthless CEO preparing for war. The confirmation of Sam's paternity and the sickening suspicion surrounding Daniel's death forced Jonathan into a complex balancing act. He needed to shield Clara and Sam from the escalating danger while simultaneously gathering the evidence needed to expose Victor Langston. He intensified his efforts to bond with his grandson, creating pockets of normalcy amidst the growing storm. He took Sam to Red Sox games, introduced him to sailing on the Charles River, and discovered Sam had inherited Daniel's keen eye for detail, noticing small things others missed. Jonathan also found himself relying on Clara's quiet strength and common sense. She, in turn, began to trust Jonathan, sharing more stories about Daniel, painting a fuller picture of the son Jonathan realized he hadn't known well enough. Their shared love for Sam and grief for Daniel forged an unexpected, powerful alliance. Professionally, Jonathan tasked Marcus Thorne and his investigative team with pursuing two main tracks: finding the missing mechanic and uncovering irrefutable financial or communication links between Victor and the sabotage. Thorne's team worked meticulously, tracing the mechanic through old professional licenses and tax records, eventually locating him living under an assumed name in Arizona, working at a small, independent garage. Simultaneously, Thorne's forensic accountants and cyber specialists began dissecting Victor Langston's financial history and digital footprint. They uncovered layers of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and encrypted communication channels. They found evidence that Victor had systematically undervalued certain Hart Enterprises assets Daniel had been interested in developing, later acquiring them indirectly himself through proxies after Daniel's death. This established a clear pattern of deceit and financial motive beyond just corporate control. Victor, feeling the pressure of Jonathan's increased scrutiny and the overt security around Clara and Sam, began his counterattack. Within Hart Enterprises, he subtly amplified rumors about Jonathan's instability, suggesting his grief and sudden attachment to the alleged grandson were clouding his judgment. He convened unofficial meetings with key board members, positioning himself as the stable hand needed to guide the company through a potential leadership crisis. He also initiated legal maneuvers, anonymously feeding information to a gossip columnist hinting at a potential paternity scandal surrounding the Hart family, attempting to preemptively discredit Clara and Sam. Clara and Sam felt the pressure directly. The unfamiliar car Sam had noticed occasionally reappeared, sometimes following them more overtly. Clara received unsettling anonymous messages online. Sam, though young, became more anxious, asking Jonathan why that man, Victor, whom he'd seen conferring with Jonathan at a company event Jonathan had brought him to, looked at him strangely. Jonathan reassured him while quietly instructing his security detail to document every instance of surveillance or harassment. Sam, perceptive like his father, started paying close attention, even using his phone to discreetly snap photos of the car when he saw it. Noting the license plate information, he dutifully reported to Grandpa. The tension mounted. Jonathan knew Victor was dangerous and wouldn't hesitate to escalate. Thorne's team was close to convincing the frightened mechanic in Arizona to talk, but he was terrified of retribution. The digital evidence against Victor was strong but complex, potentially requiring lengthy legal battles to unravel fully in court. Jonathan needed a way to force Victor's hand, to expose him decisively before Victor could either consolidate power at Hart Enterprises or harm Clara and Sam. The breakthrough came from Arizona. Marcus Thorne, employing a combination of legal assurances, financial incentives, and appeals to conscience, finally convinced the mechanic, David Chun, to provide a sworn, videotaped deposition. Chun tearfully confessed that Victor Langston had paid him handsomely 5 years ago to subtly damage the brake fluid reservoir cap on Daniel Hart's car, causing a slow leak that wouldn't be immediately obvious but would likely lead to brake failure under stress, like hard braking on a wet road. Victor had assured him it would look like an accident due to known, but minor, issues with that car model. Chin detailed the payment methods through intermediaries and his subsequent fear-fueled relocation. Jonathan now had the smoking gun, direct testimony implicating Victor in murder. But Chun, terrified, would only agree to testify formally if his safety was absolutely guaranteed, requiring complex witness protection arrangements. Furthermore, Victor still held significant sway within Hart Enterprises. A direct accusation could trigger a destructive corporate war, potentially allowing Victor to escape or destroy evidence before legal proceedings could secure it. Victor, sensing Jonathan's investigation closing in, perhaps through his own sources or Thorne's team's necessary legal filings related to Chin's deposition, escalated dramatically. He orchestrated a series of anonymous leaks to financial reporters, detailing exaggerated concerns about Jonathan's mental fitness and questioning the legality of the trust established for Sam. He formally petitioned the Hart Enterprises board for an emergency meeting to discuss Jonathan's capacity to lead, scheduling it just days away, clearly planning a corporate coup. Simultaneously, the threat against Clara and Sam intensified beyond surveillance. Clara received a chilling package containing a single, dead Daisy Daniels' favorite flower, a symbol Sam often left at the grave. It was an unmistakable, deeply personal threat. Jonathan's security team intercepted a suspicious individual attempting to approach Sam near his school. This was Jonathan's darkest hour. Victor was moving on all fronts: corporate, personal, threatening. The pressure was immense. He felt the weight of his son's death, the safety of his newfound family, and the fate of his life's work resting on his next move. He huddled with Clara, Marcus Thorne, and his legal team. They needed a plan to expose Victor, definitively neutralize the threat, and counter the coup, ideally all at once. They decided on a high-stakes strategy centered around the emergency board meeting Victor himself had called. Jonathan would allow the meeting to proceed. While Victor made his case against Jonathan, Thorne's team would finalize arrangements with the district attorney's office, presenting Chin's deposition and the corroborating financial/digital evidence to secure an arrest warrant. The plan was to have Victor arrested during or immediately after the board meeting, exposing his crimes at the moment of his attempted triumph. Clara and Sam were moved temporarily to a secure location under heavy guard. Jonathan prepared for the corporate battle of his life, knowing that failure meant not only losing his company, but potentially endangering his grandson and the woman Daniel loved. The final confrontation was set, not in a dark alley, but in the polished, high-stakes arena of the Hart Enterprises boardroom. The Hart Enterprises boardroom buzzed with nervous energy. Board members shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Jonathan's gaze as Victor Langston stood at the head of the table, confidently outlining his case for Jonathan's removal. He spoke of Jonathan's erratic behavior, his unhealthy obsession with the past, and the destabilizing influence of Clara and Sam, painting a picture of a grieving man losing his grip, endangering the company. He presented carefully selected anecdotes and half-truths, his voice smooth, reasonable, masking the venom beneath. Jonathan listened impassively, his face betraying nothing. He let Victor finish, let the unease settle in the room. Then he rose slowly. "Thank you, Victor," Jonathan began, his voice quiet but commanding instant attention. "Your concern for Hart Enterprises and for my well-being is noted." He gestured towards a large screen at the end of the room. "Before the board considers Mr. Langston's motion, however, there are some matters requiring clarification. Matters concerning loyalty, fiduciary duty, and the tragic death of my son, Daniel." As he spoke, Marcus Thorne discreetly entered the room with two plainclothes detectives and an assistant DA standing near the door. On the screen, the videotape deposition of David Chun began to play. The boardroom watched, stunned into silence, as the frightened mechanic detailed Victor Langston's plot to sabotage Daniel's car. Victor leaped to his feet, sputtering objections, his face draining of color. "This is fabricated. Lies. Is it, Victor?" Jonathan continued, his voice like ice. He signaled, and the screen shifted, displaying encrypted communications recovered by Thorne's team, financial trails linking Victor to Chun through shell corporations, evidence of Victor actively suppressing information about Daniel's relationship with Clara. Or is this the action of a man who saw my son as an obstacle to his ambition? A man who, upon discovering Daniel did have an heir, escalated to threats and intimidation. He held up a printed photo of the dead Daisy sent to Clara. The board members stared, aghast, connecting the dots. Victor, trapped and exposed, looked wildly towards the door, perhaps considering escape, but the detective stepped forward purposefully. "Victor Langston," the lead detective stated clearly, "you are under arrest for the murder of Daniel Hart, conspiracy, and related financial crimes." Victor stared in disbelief as handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, his meticulously crafted world collapsing in moments. His attempted corporate coup had become the stage for his final, public downfall. Jonathan watched him being led away, feeling not triumph, but a profound, weary sadness, and the first flicker of long-delayed justice for his son. Victor Langston's arrest and the subsequent trial captivated Boston. The evidence, meticulously gathered by Jonathan's team, was overwhelming. David Chun testified under protection. Financial records and digital communications laid bare Victor's ruthless ambition and conspiracy. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. The attempted coup at Hart Enterprises fizzled. Jonathan, his leadership solidified and his name cleared of Victor's smears, addressed the board and employees with renewed purpose, vowing to lead with integrity in honor of Daniel's memory. He initiated reforms, promoting ethical leadership and transparency, slowly steering the corporate giant back on course. Most importantly, Jonathan focused on his family. He legally formalized Sam's status as his grandson and heir. He and Clara navigated their relationship carefully, building trust and mutual respect, united by their shared love for Sam and Daniel. There was no pressure for romance, just a commitment to co-parenting Sam in a loving, supportive environment. Clara, choosing financial independence, but accepting support for Sam's education and well-being, continued teaching, finding joy in her work. Jonathan poured resources into creating the Daniel Hart Center for Emerging Artists, a vibrant space offering studios, grants, and mentorship for young artists struggling to find their voice, the kind of support Daniel himself would have championed. He also established the foundation Victor's actions had inadvertently inspired, focusing on supporting victims of corporate crime and providing resources for families navigating sudden loss. Life found a new rhythm. Sam thrived, secure in the love of his mother and grandfather, slowly learning about the father he resembled so closely through stories and the art celebrated at the center. The Beacon Hill mansion, once silent, now occasionally echoed with a child's laughter during Sam's visits. One crisp autumn afternoon, Jonathan stood with Sam and Clara at Daniel's grave. They placed a small bouquet of daisies and Sam's latest drawing on the stone. There were still tears, but they mingled now with acceptance and love. Looking at Sam, so full of life, Jonathan felt the deep wound his heart finally begin to scar over, replaced not by forgetting, but by continuity. He hadn't just found his grandson. He had reclaimed a future, finding an unexpected, poignant echo of his lost son and a reason to truly live again.